Guys, you have to excuse any background noise here. We're having a rainstorm, so it is what it is. So today, I want to talk about camshafts, lifters, oil, and rings, and all in response to what I've seen on other people's videos. So as you know, on this channel, we've done a lot of videos on camshafts, camshaft failures, camshaft break-in, all of these different elements. And a couple of days ago, a channel called Muscle Car Solutions dropped a video on camshaft failure. And it was pretty comprehensive. It's a good video. But in that video, he made a couple of points actually referring back to the videos that we had done. He didn't mention us by name, but I knew by what he was talking about that he was referring to us. So I wanted to clarify a couple of things. Make them clearer because perhaps I didn't do it sufficiently on the videos that we had done. So one of the things we were talking about camshaft lobe taper. And the taper is an important element of the camshaft in that it's what promotes the lifter to spin as the engine's running. So the taper, as we did a whole video on this. We did a video on lobe taper and lifter crown and how to measure the taper on the cam. So what we did was we illustrated using a micrometer, using a caliper or a micrometer. And we illustrated making that measurement from the nose to the base circle on one side of the lobe, and then going to the other side of the lobe and measuring that. Subtracting the big number from the small number, calculating that gives you lobe taper. Now, in his video, he said, and rightfully so, that 0.003 of an inch, which is the number that we determined on this cam, this is actually the cam that we measured, that 0.003 of an inch is an excessive amount of taper. And he is right, 0.003 of an inch would be an excessive amount of taper. But there's no way to measure taper across the lobe on its own. You can't just lay a straight edge across the lobe and then measure taper. So the only way I could think of doing it was to use a caliper or micrometer and measure from one side, nose to base circle, slide it across, nose to base circle, and calculate the difference. And in our case, it's 0.003 of an inch, which would be 1.5 thousandths of taper. But you can't measure it any other way. So perhaps I phrased it wrong when I said 0.003 of an inch taper, but that's really the only way that you can measure this. So keep that in mind. If you've got 0.003 of an inch taper, it means that you've got 1.5 on the top and 1.5 on the bottom. Does that make sense? He talked about lifters also. So a couple of things. The first was that he said in the video that there are no used lifters on the market. And I know for a fact that this is not true. We actually had somebody in the comments of the video we did on lifters. We had somebody in the comments saying that they worked at an engine dismantling shop and they had 55-gallon drums full of lifters, and they was divided by the type of engines that they were. And then they shipped these off to wherever part of the world that they rebuild these things. They would send them and they would get reconditioned from that point. Now, I can't say which company, I don't know which companies would use this type of lifter. No doubt a white box type of thing. But reconditioning lifters is not a new concept. It's been done since, well, for as long as we've had lifters, there have been people reconditioning lifters. It actually wasn't really unheard of back in the day. It was normal. So yes, there are used or reconditioned lifters out on the market. I'm certain of that. Where they're sold, or who they're sold by, I don't know. But it is something to keep in mind. Now here's something that I learned from his video. Because he was talking about the swirl marks that you find after a lifter has been ground. So you know, a lifter has to be ground with a crown to it. And that mates up with the taper on the lobe. And that's the spinning. That's what makes it spin. And that's the wear pattern that develops, that makes each lifter and lobe relationship unique. So he pointed out on his video that he sees two different types of swirl patterns. One is good and one is bad. And I'll leave it to you to watch his video and he'll cover that. You'll understand what he's saying there. But what he left out was something that we had found and illustrated when we did our video on lifters. And that is that I came across a set of lifters purchased at a known auto parts store that had neither type of swirl mark. Instead, these lifters had straight lines in like a plaid sort of pattern, like a checkerboard or a plaid sort of pattern, meaning that they weren't ground in a circular way to create a crown. They were ground straight across. I don't know who manufactured these things. I don't know the history of them. I just know that they were purchased through a regular auto parts store. And the full set was like that. We showed it on the video. That's an obvious red flag. If you see straight lines ground across the face of a lifter, throw it, walk away from it. It's no good. But what he did say was there are two different types of swirl marks, and one indicates a finer level of machining than the other. He also talked about chamfer, which is an important thing that we left out too. So like I said, I'm not by no means am I nitpicking at his video. I'm just elaborating on points that he made. The third thing that he talked about in that video that I have to add something to is oil. So he was saying, and rightfully so, that a break-in additive like a STP or a Lucas or any of these companies that make additives, high zinc rich additives for break-in, that those additives will not mix with a conventional oil. Like let's just, and I'm just going to use Rotella as an example, because Rotella does have small amounts of zinc in it. Not enough for a break-in period, so you need to add a zinc additive to it for the break-in period. Now his point in the video was that those two liquids do not mix. And he is absolutely right. The oil additive that you pour in does not homogeneously mix with the base oil. So if you've got 5 quarts of Rotella in there and you throw in a pint of, let's say, STP, it's not like the STP melds and becomes one with the base oil. For that to happen, it's got to be done under certain circumstances. Certain heat, certain additives, things have to be done to homogenize the liquid. But here's the thing. You've got your 5 quarts of oil, regular oil, in the crankcase, and now you're going to add your zinc-rich additive. It's not like they go to separate parts of the oil pan and hide from each other. The zinc-rich additive will be held in suspension in the regular oil. So even though it hasn't become a homogeneous liquid, that zinc is still being circulated through the engine. It's being picked up through the pickup. It's being smashed by the oil pump. It's being pressurized. It's being sent through the passages of the engine under pressure. It's in suspension. It's not a homogeneous liquid. You did not create a new oil by pouring an additive into the existing oil. But that additive will remain in suspension. And as long as that additive is in suspension, it's going to do the job that it's supposed to do and create that zinc coating over the parts as they're breaking in. So, and like I said, I'm not nitpicking or putting down his video in any way, shape, or form. I'm just elaborating on points that he made. I do recommend this channel. We've done a lot of Edelbrock stuff on this channel, and he actually goes one step further. He's done a bunch of Edelbrock carburetor videos, and he gets into the really nitty-gritty aspects of those carburetors. So if you're interested in that Edelbrock style carburetor, I highly recommend his channel. It's good stuff. All right, so moving away from that, rings. So the other day I caught an episode of Finnegan's Garage. Now we had done a video on rings not too long ago, sometime in this last year. And we did a video on rings, different types and treatments and so on and so forth. But something happened with Finnegan's motor that we left out, like a situation that we didn't cover in our video. So I thought this would be a good time to do it. So here's what happened. So as you know, Finnegan's got like a full tilt blown Hemi in Blasphemy. It's an all aluminum motor. And this thing is, it's got the best pieces money can buy, including rings. And in that engine, he's got a set of stainless steel rings. This is what we didn't cover on the video that we had done, and I thought we should get into this now. Stainless rings, when you go for a top-of-the-line full race ring package, they generally include a stainless top ring. They're thin, they're low drag, they do an exceptionally good job under extremely high pressures. But they're sensitive to heat. They're much more sensitive to heat than a cast ring. So what happened in his situation is, for whatever reason, the car ran lean at some point as it was going down the track. And when it went lean, what happened was the combustion chamber temperatures skyrocketed. And because it was lean and it didn't have a liquid fuel barrier around the outside of the combustion chamber, as would be normal in an engine like that, the heat ate that up and it got directly to the ring. So what happened was the stainless ring gets hot fast. They're thin, stainless. It got hot. And when they got hot, they lost their temper. So when he pulled the pistons out of the motor, instead of the ring springing open like that, the ring just kind of like hung there like a dead piece of metal, which means that as the engine was running, it didn't have the tension against the cylinder wall that it needs to keep it scraped and clean. So oil and whatnot was able to get past the ring. Fuel was able to get past going one way, oil goes past the other way. It lost its seal, and the motor had several very weak cylinders and was pumping oil. So this brings us to, when do you use a stainless ring? When is stainless the way to go, or when is the good old-fashioned cast or cast moly ring the way to go? So stainless rings are used primarily in full tilt engines. These engines use a lot of fuel. They put a lot of fuel volume through the engine, and not all of that fuel is burned during the combustion process, during that initial combustion process. If you look at an engine, if you look at a race engine that's had a couple of hard passes on a clean piston, you'll see that there are very distinctive heat marks on the piston. And especially they're very, very evident on a Hemi, because it's right in the center. You'll see a circle in the center, and then as you go out from the center, the color changes until you get to the very outside of it, and you can see that no heat ever reached the outside part of the chamber. And that's because during that combustion process, there's enough fuel around the outside creating a thermal barrier between the cylinder wall, the edge of the piston, and the ring. It creates a thermal barrier, and the ring never really gets hot. The ring never gets hotter than the section of the piston or the cylinder wall that it's riding against. When that charge is eaten up for whatever reason, and in his case it was the thing went lean, that thermal barrier of fuel is gone, and now the ring is subjected to 100% of the heat from the combustion process. And it only takes a second or so of that to turn it into just a dead piece of metal, no longer able to scrape the cylinder walls. So, if you're trying to choose a ring, the best ring for your application, keep that in mind. Stainless rings offer the highest level of sealing under completely adverse conditions. So they stand up very well to detonation, speed, they don't flutter. They're the best way to go. But the best isn't always the best for your application. If you run a street car, street strip car, something that occasionally sees very high combustion temperatures, let's just say a blown car or a nitrous car, and there's any chance of, even for a brief period of time, the engine running on the lean side, that heat will destroy the pistons, and you've got to pull the motor apart. Full race stainless pistons are best left to engines, especially blown alcohol, nitro, supercharged engines that use a lot of fuel volume. They're blowing a bunch of fuel through the engine. And that extends to even nitrous cars, super high-end performance engines. They blow a lot of unburned fuel through the exhaust. That unburned fuel is a thermal barrier. That's where those rings shine. That's where they do their best. If you're building an engine that, let's just say, you expect to pull apart after every couple of runs, every few runs, every dozen runs or whatever, and re-ring, or you can keep close tabs on it in that respect, then by all means, use a high-quality stainless steel ring. But if you're putting this thing together and you kind of want it to stay together and run trouble-free for a long period of time and be more resilient to brief periods of high combustion chamber temperatures, then use a cast or a cast moly ring. They're extremely forgiving. You could take a cast ring out of a 75-year-old engine that's been sitting, 300,000 miles, and it's been sitting forever, and you could take the cast ring out of it and they just spring right open the way they're supposed to. You take a stainless ring that just took a couple of blinks of the eye of excessive heat, and it's junk. There's nothing left of it. So keep that in mind if you're choosing rings for an engine that you're building. So that's it. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. I got to thank Muscle Car Solutions in Finnegan's Garage for providing me with material for this episode. And I hope you got something out of that. And I'll see you tomorrow.